Hey everyone, welcome to the Leadership Shift podcast. I am your host, Dr. Joe Pennino, and with me today is a very special guest, Lucy Ellis, principal and founder of the Calyx. Lucy, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Great to have you here. First, maybe just tell us a little bit about the Calyx and what that is.
The Calyx is my company that I founded a few years back and have really leaned in the last half a year or so. And we're a kind of boutique consulting advisory company, and we work with executives that work on the common good. So those are local government leaders, it's nonprofits, sometimes it's companies, but ultimately they're all leaders that have to cross a frontier of something that they haven't before with their teams, and they serve the common good in some form. We work a lot in advisory spaces, and that kind of, I'm your thought partner, I'm your provocateur, I'm bringing those questions that you are like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's fair.
Right.
Sorry.
I like it.
Yep, that's what we're here for. And then, but we can also kind of spread out and deepen, get embedded inside the organization and be really sort of getting at the ways of working on a day-to-day basis as well to help you operationalize the shifts that need to happen in leadership, in strategy, and all the rest in service of that frontier you're trying to cross.
People actually pay you to ask them uncomfortable questions.
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
Nice. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what you call the operating system, embracing volatility, uncertainty, and change. So I think to get us started, kind of set the stage for us. What's this phrase that you use, the operating system?
The operating system is really like a piece of the puzzle, I would say. My bias, my love, my place I want to hang out in is to talk about how we're going to navigate volatility and how we're going to get there. We can talk about starting out in crisis and emergency response, which, you know, you and I have those kind of shared roots professionally, and you being in the fire world and me being in humanitarian response. But so like, that's the end goal. That's the interesting thing, is how do we drive traction, progress, momentum in the face of that? But the operating system is one of the lenses that we need to be able to look through and make sense of and tinker with in order to face that volatility. So the operating system is just a term that I learned and have used in some of the other companies I've worked in, which is how we do things around here, how we meet, how we make decisions, how we, use information, share information, how we grow, how we learn, how we model behavior to others, all these sorts of things, the assumptions underneath those things. And it's kind of like the culture of the place, but like in concrete terms. You can't change culture. Culture is read only. Culture is not a thing that people are like, yeah, I'm going to change the culture. That's good luck and Godspeed. I'll see you on the other side. But the operating system is concrete things that we can tinker with that will change culture, but maybe not as we expect. And so we tackle the operating system and changing it and evolving it and experimenting with it in service of what we're trying to do differently to cross that frontier in the midst of volatility.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part for me is a lot of times we think about the operating system is just something that exists and runs in the background and doesn't get a lot of attention. But the way that you describe it is something that can actually be adjusted and changed and focused on.
Exactly. And it's like people go to very blunt tools very quickly when they like, right, we got to navigate this change. Right, reorg. It's like, but the structures and the boxes and lines in the org chart is actually the last thing you need to touch. It really, really is. It's always, the structure is always, that comes last. There's so many other things, your meeting rhythms and designs and how you do strategy and the way you distribute authority, all of those things can be touched sooner than that. And so seeing it more like a garden or something that is, it's more kind of organic rather than a machine that you kind of get in with a scalpel and fix certain parts and then it's fixed forever. It's just not how organizations are in reality.
I think that's great because, you run the risk if you go in with that blunt instrument or the sledgehammer and you do a big reorg, but you don't fix the underlying systems and processes and the things that you're talking about, you risk falling back into the same trap.
Absolutely.
So volatility, we talk about embrace volatility. And I think that to some people probably paints a picture of just kind of white knuckling it, accepting just chaos and sheer overwhelm. What is that? What does it mean to you?
To me, first of all, it means taking life on life's terms and taking reality for what it is. I remember I worked at CDC during the pandemic, and in the very first weeks, it was probably late January 2020. It's still not even called COVID. It's called nCoV-19 at this point. And I was working with the burgeoning international task force. There's an emergency management system of various task forces, and there was an international one. And there's like a dozen people in a meeting room starting to, deal with what we're seeing pop up around the world. And I ran an exercise with them called Critical Uncertainties, which is designed to help you. It's a scenario planning exercise of like, right, what do we most need to attend to and mitigate the risk against? And in the end, the exercise brought up that the two things that were most likely to risk like toppling over our efforts to tackle what was emerging was if at the time that the test kits that were going out to states were not working. This is like the very first debacle that no one remembers that because that was January 2020. Yeah. But basically the test kits didn't work once they got to the states, right? So the test kits out to the states, and the other one that came up was that we as staff would start getting this new disease, and then what would we do about that? The exercise worked because 6 weeks later, here we are suddenly not in any meeting rooms. We're working from home. But the problem is we didn't have enough imagination, and we didn't want to believe that this is really what was happening. So we came up with that exercise, and we were like, okay, like, what do we do? Like, I don't know, put hand sanitizer machines at the door of every room? Whatever. We don't have time for this. They literally said, that's all like fun and good, but we're too busy with the present day in front of us. We put our head down and ignored it. So to me, that's the very first thing about embracing volatility, is being like, I will take life on life's terms and accept what is true about this situation, no matter how uncomfortable that is. And then having the imagination and doing the discipline, like it's imaginary discipline. I have the discipline to use my imagination. I have practices that create a discipline of using my imagination to see what might really unfold. And that we have the trust and the confidence that we will learn to navigate whatever might come up, because sometimes we don't want to look at what our imagination could bring up because we're too afraid to deal with what it might require of us. So that's step number one. And then step number two, and I'd say these are more like principles that then have lots of practices that fall out from this. And the second thing is establishing discipline and order within in order to allow for the chaos without, and then volatility without. The way you don't, in fact, some of the most adaptive teams that are most able to navigate uncertainty and volatility, it's because of how solid their rhythms and routines are, right? You would know this, I'm sure, having been in the fire space. And it's not rigid, but it's about finding the things that are going to allow us to like keep the flow of information and decisions and clarity and priority, keep those things flowing and fresh without us everything being like a reaction in a fire, right? It's like, because we have a rhythm, we know that like anything that needs to be unblocked, we have that moment where that's going to get unblocked, and we have the muscle of doing that. We know there's going to be a moment we zoom out and we reflect on what's changing. We know that so-and-so has the right to make these decisions, and so they just get made. So it's that discipline around rhythms, routine, and that's the operating system piece, is all those elements of the operating system need to be well designed for that volatility. But most of what we often see is we want control and rigidity inside the organization as our best attempt at trying to deal with the volatility outside. And in fact, the brittleness leads to more issues than solutions a lot of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so great. I think that's what you're talking about, is where the resiliency comes from. Because I can remember in the fire service, like you go to work every day with plans, right? And the plans are like, well, we have to wash the trucks and we've got to go do training and but always like you come to work knowing that multiple times during the day, the tones are going to go off and you could either be going to a house fire or a medical emergency. Like that is just when it happens, it's not a surprise to anyone. But
Mhm.
you still have that underlying structure of like these things still just need to happen.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I think from a local government perspective, I see that also happening in our communications department. Same thing. We've got policies to refine. We've got our normal communication projects and comms plans that we're pushing out. It's volatile. At any second, there could be the breaking thing that happens in the city that everyone has to pivot to.
Hmm.
And you're right. The key to success is not being thrown off by that, but
Hmm.
having that operating system in place that is supportive and allows you to then deal with that.
And what you're bringing up there is like, we saw this a lot inside of CDC during COVID, especially, but any emergency response is really the like business as usual side of things and then the emerging novel situation that you're dealing with. And there is some level of like those two things being distinct operations and experiences. But what we found with COVID is like, yeah, but the day to day programs that are experts on, like vaccine distribution to the states, like there are day to day systems that are already set up that need to be leaned on in moments of volatility and emergency situations that you can't just like set up a whole nother structure to deal with the emergency. You have to have this ability for those day to day structures to emerge and adapt in the moment to and come together in new ways in service of the thing that's emerging. And I've seen this sort of attempt in a lot of organizations to try and kind of keep those two things separate rather than saying we need to build the capability of the organization to adapt and pivot and evolve in response to that volatile environment. You can't protect anything or any aspect of the organization from the volatility. Some are further back, but everyone's going to feel it at some point, and better to be able to think in systems. And there are a lot of simple practices that when they are spread across an organization, kind of unlock a whole lot of capacity very, very easily. And so it's that commitment that what I love most is when I'm working with leaders and teams where they are really committed to raising the bar of the whole organization's capacity to evolve. They're not just them as the leader or the leadership team, but like we want everybody to be able to think in strategic trade-offs and think in terms of having the autonomy to make the decisions they need to make. And that's kind of a different way of thinking about organizational life and the job of a leader being one to steward the evolving of their system based on whatever leadership principles and values matter most to the work that we do.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about how leaders tend to fail when it comes to volatility, and that is over planning to control the situation versus on the other side ceding control and just accepting the overwhelm. And those are two sides to the same coin. Can you maybe illuminate that a little more for us?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a classic kind of pattern that we see of like either because both of those are natural human responses. And so I think the other layer here, like we're talking a lot about the operating system and this, but underneath all of this is deep leadership work. And at the end of the day, we are all trying to search for a sense of security, control, and approval. There's a really fantastic framework that I use judiciously in certain ways around what we call conscious leadership. And I didn't come up with it. You can look it up. But one of the commitments is around saying, I am the source of my own sense of security, control, and approval. And when we're in leadership roles, we want to feel like we're doing a good job and we want to feel like we're in control so that we can feel secure about our role as a leader and know that we're valuable, right? But the very attempt to keep control of certain things and make sure people are like on board with what we have to say, or deciding we're like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. I don't need their approval. I just need them to do the thing, right? Some of us need approval more than others. Some of us need control more than others. But all of us are just looking for security. That's what's underneath it. And so when you see one of those other extremes, whether a leader that's kind of just like, oh, well, so let everybody like just figure it out themselves, or the other side of it where they're over planning and over controlling, there's a lack of self-awareness and a lack of dropping down into like, hang on a second, where am I contributing to this? Because I don't know how to deal with my own need to feel in control or feel approval. And I think that sort of points to just like the deeper task of leading through volatility, which is, I have something of a bias, which is that I just don't think that there's any version of leading just with your head. Like, and just without doing your kind of inner work, as you might call it. Not everybody agrees with that, but I think that what I've seen is you can't move an organization through really massively hard, chaotic, crazy crisis moments if you don't have some of that level of inner work going on and you're not equipped. Because otherwise, all your stuff that you haven't figured out and worked through is leaking out on everybody around you. And so as a leader, you have this disproportionate influence on the system and the experience that people have in that system.
Yeah, there's no question the impact that leaders have on organizations and on people. When you were talking about everyone's kind of looking for this security and this kind of safety, it was kind of reminding me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like physiological needs and safety as you kind of work your way up. But I think it's important. I think you bring that kind of whole self perspective of that's within all of us, that exists. So we talked about control versus almost like this learned helplessness or this victim. There's nothing I can do about it. How does modulating come into this?
Tell me, when you say modulating, like, tell me more.
I think I frame it as how much effort and how much attention we give things based on the actual risk that they pose.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
absolutely. Yeah. So like, how do we go about modulating our attention based on the risk involved? Yeah, exactly. So I think this is where my mind goes to another framework that I lean very heavily on is the work of Heifetz and Linsky around adaptive leadership. I think we've talked about this both. Yeah, I think that to me is some of the best for thinking about this idea of modulating, because the first place to start in that is really understanding what kind of challenge you're dealing with, right? And risk is, so the risks associated with what we would call a technical problem, which is one that with enough expertise can be fixed, and then it's fixed until it breaks again, and then we can fix it again, is not the same as an adaptive challenge, which is something that doesn't have a clear pathway to solve. It involves loss of some kind. Somebody's going to lose out. And it involves obviously emotions, and it requires people to sit with uncertainty, to sit with, I don't have the answers right now. I was just with a leader today who has to move through some really hard stuff and make some very hard decisions, and needs to bring people in closely, but is afraid to say, look, I don't have the answers yet. But I said, do you think that they would rather that you bring them in and say, hey, I'm committed to moving through this hard thing, even though I don't have the answers, and I want you on the team to do it together? Or do you think the biggest burden is not having the information and not having any visibility of whether anything's going to move forward? So you invite them in, and that already is a key piece of the puzzle. And so I think sometimes when we think about modulating risk, we don't allow ourselves the space not to know. They call it negative capability. How much it's a sign of our maturity that we can sit in the inability to have a solution yet. We can sit in the phase of diagnosis. And what I think, if we just focused on sound diagnosis of challenges, that would make, I think, a lot of the risk side of it so much clearer. But what I see so often, and this comes back to what I said at the beginning about like just taking life on life's terms and really owning the reality, is when we want to make it a problem about the org chart or a problem about the SOP about this thing and not a problem about, it's really hard to have candid conversations here. We've not actually clarified what's a priority. We don't really want to clarify the priorities, because then that means so-and-so's feelings are going to get hurt. And we don't want to ask anyone to change because these people, well, I just don't think that, like, that's the stuff that we have to be able to talk about and diagnose. So I think that's where I start when I think about modulating risk. And the first step when it comes to adaptive leadership is the diagnostics and doing that well.
You know, Heifetz and Linsky, we talk about the technical versus the adaptive, and you talked about the diagnosis. There is real risk in misdiagnosing a problem that is adaptive as technical and just throwing a technical solution at it. And then I think when leaders do that and they see that it didn't fix it, they're confused. I don't understand.
Yeah. But technical solutions are very seductive. They go great on a comms, like on a PR press release. And this is the like challenge as a leader is, am I going to do the mature thing or am I going to do the comfortable thing? The mature thing is to sit in that negative capability of, we don't have the solution yet. And the thing is, diagnosis isn't a one-time thing. Again, when you have those more adaptive ways of working, meeting rhythms, ways we have conversations, ways we make decisions, it allows more breathing room for things to kind of come up and for sense making as a collective to be an ongoing task, an ongoing activity. We don't need to get it right that one time and then put it in the slide deck and announce it to everybody and ta-da! It's like we just need to be able to name what we can see right now and then have a way that people can engage in that conversation on an ongoing basis at all levels and appropriate to each level, obviously, so that we can all see the elephant together. And the sense making, the muscle of sense making in teams is like usually absent in a lot of teams I come into. Like, just they don't even have the language. They're like, what do you mean sense making? Literally just the work of sitting around and understanding what's going on together. We don't do that because we want to get that solution. We've got to be okay with not having a solution right away, because then we're less likely to grab for that like sugar high of a technical solution that's not going to get us there.
It's like the pizza party for a organization that has got terrible morale and is sick.
Oh my gosh.
You do the pizza party, you're like, look, I did the thing. We're good now, right? Like,
yeah,
are you? Are you good? Probably not.
Yeah. And it's so incredible the speed with which you see a conversation about like, oh, well, it seems like people feel really, really disengaged. Right. Well, maybe we should like do a survey about it. Maybe we should. Okay. Yeah. And we need more recognition and awards. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take on the awards. Yeah. Great. Go. There's no exploration. Like, what do you mean disengaged? For what? Why do people not? Because we can't stand the idea that like it's too much work, honestly. And it's too much work because we haven't made the shift from individual contributor and manager to leader, right? And managers, there's a sense of like you drive the execution of work and keep things on track and make sure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Leadership is getting, as Heifetz and Linsky would say, getting up off the dance floor onto the balcony and looking down and understanding the whole. And most people are like, I'm too busy to do that. And you're like, no, you're not. The opposite is like, you should spend more of your time up on the balcony. And they talk about the skill of moving between the balcony and the dance floor. Right. And most leaders feel like getting up on the balcony is like a luxury, but like the opposite, you can't afford not to.
The balcony in one of the executive programs that I was in Emmitsburg at the United States Fire Administration, we did this exercise of going to the balcony. So you had to explain a situation in your agency to a group of people. You had about 5 minutes to explain what the issues are, and then you had to go to the balcony. You had to turn your back to them, and they got to discuss, well, what's really going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredibly useful, and it's also very frustrating because you want to chime in and go, well, no, that's not it. But the stuff that they start talking about and peeling back the layers, you're like, wow, there really is more to this than what I'm just thinking about at surface level.
But then just this morning, I had another client where we ran, for the first time, I ran what we would call like a retrospective meeting, and there'd been some hesitation on the team. There's someone who was like, "Well, I've done lots of retros, and I don't think we need one for a team this small." And I said, "Well, what was a retrospective in your experience?" And it was like, "Well, it's about getting people aligned and making sure the work's happening and everything's driving forward." And I said, "That's not a retrospective." I'm not sure what that is. I think it sounds like project management, but it's not a retrospective, because a retrospective is not about getting to answers. A retrospective is zooming out and making sense of things. And it's always the thing that people don't feel like they have time for and they're probably going to skip over. And then yet you do it and you're like, oh, and even one insight from a retrospective, like, hang on, we don't really have someone to own this whole thing over here, that like there's all these symptoms of like gaps. And actually, in reality, at root, it's because we just don't have anyone owning all these things. So here we are running around trying to fill all these gaps, but we're not dealing with the root cause. Now that we've had a conversation and we can all see it for what it is, take life on life's terms, we can do something about that. We can make a decision to change. But it's not solving, it's an adaptive challenge, because it's not like you just kind of, hire someone, put them in a role and go. You got to figure out what's the scope of work and what exactly was missing and who's the right fit and da 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 da. And like the job's not done, but we've at least oriented and located and diagnosed the real issue that needs dealing with.
Absolutely. I think taking the time to do that is time well spent. Tell me a little bit more about your time at the CDC during COVID and the lessons that you learned, because I was in the fire service during that time, and that is in no way what you guys were dealing with there. So I can't even imagine.
I'll say, like, caveat, anytime I talk about my time at CDC, and especially during COVID, I feel like a little bit of a fraud, because I just know the people that were there right through it and beyond and are still there. But my lived experience is still relevant and still worthy, I think, of sharing. And I shared this story with you in sort of some of our conversations before, is like, we had some systems that were pretty rigid when it came to, like, you have an incident management structure, which is kind of a pretty formalized way. I'm sure it's similar in fire, right, of how you deal with emergencies. But ultimately, the systems just had never dealt with anything this large before. So there was a lot of like figuring it out, making it up on the fly as you go. And, there's certain things that are like seared into my brain that I feel like there are other people that would have 60 examples like this, but I have like 2 or 3, which is trying to like staff up from 25 to 125 people in a 4-week period from like March to April of 2020, right? And like there was a whole kind of request system and like some sort of software interface to request for the kind of role you needed, and then a Power BI like visualization and blah blah blah, something or other. But it was just like not providing the results that were needed, because at that point things were changing by the hour. We didn't know exactly what we needed. It's like we need an epi from like that division over there who is good with people and relationships and ambiguity. 3 bullets, right? And so I ended up, at least on the international task force, I ended up building the most analog system of like a spreadsheet and I was like, there are 8 divisions in this organization that are going to be the source of the best staffing for the international task force. I know that because I know how the international program, coming back to what I said earlier about where is the business as usual already in place. There's no point in bringing over someone from domestic injury to work in the international task force if we can pull in someone who's actually worked in the international space, because they have context and relationships and knowledge that we need. So it was like, right, give me a POC from each of those 8 divisions. Here's a shared spreadsheet. Because the thing is that people would be then, if the system didn't work, then they just go poaching people left, right, and center, and there's chaos, and supervisors are like, wait, you didn't ask my permission. And why did you? It's like, oh my goodness, now people are having family feuds when we're in the middle of trying to get like a pre-pandemic response going. This is not working. So we had a system where, right, liaisons from each of these divisions, I get them on a rhythm. I get a spreadsheet going where they can be adding in like the names of people from their divisions who have signaled their interest to serve. And then there's like a link to a shared folder where people have dropped their CVs, and those CVs are linked to names. And then the team leads on the task force are coming to me and saying, right, I need this kind of a person, 3 bullets. I'm like, I'll just pull it out of you verbally if that's what it takes. I don't need a job description because you're too busy trying to run this thing. So my job is to get you the right kind of person as quickly as possible, and really turning it around and centering the end goal and not the process to get us what we needed, and eliminate a lot of that friction and frustration. And we built something that worked, but it wasn't what had been in place before. And I think there's a real tendency to poo-poo like the workarounds and the workarounds of the workarounds. But if you're seeing workarounds of workarounds, it's because you're too attached to the rigid system that you won't let go of. So you've got to think like water. Think about how water would move through something. Like, let the organic tell you what is most relevant, most important, what's working, what's not, and don't stay attached to your solution. Is really, and the thing was, things are so big and so like unprecedented with COVID that very quickly people kind of let go of like, we got to stick to this system. But things like most of the folks that did budget management were contractors, and yet you couldn't bring contractors into emergency response. But we were about to have hundreds of millions of dollars like flush down from Congress. Like, who was going to manage all that money? We could. So I was like, well, somehow we have to figure out how to get contractors, and I think one of the things that came out of COVID was that sort of became like a standing part of, contractor agreements with the contracting companies that would serve CDC, is people could be deployed to emergency response, so stuff like that. That was like, well, we're just going to have to figure out how to move that barrier. There is no too bad, figure it out, and short of like major legal hurdles, it's just a different mindset of like, no, that bureaucracy is not the most immutable thing on the planet. You know what's the most immutable thing on the planet? Is that freaking pathogen that's got plans.
That's right.
Respect the pathogen, not the bureaucracy. And that's the kind of principle I like to bring to all my clients. It's like, what's the thing you really got to respect instead of the fortress of bureaucracy that you've built for yourself?
Yeah. You have another example about that, about cruise ships.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, it's that like blowing your imagination up, right? So I got pulled into the response because the cruise ship situation was getting so big, and the people that had been doing international overall were pulled to then go do the cruise ship thing. So I came in to be deputy on the international task force for a very short period of time compared to some of the other folks that I know led it on to much bigger and greater things. But, the first, I remember walking into this meeting room that was like, there were like 25 people crammed into this meeting room and like backpacks everywhere and snacks and all the rest. And across one wall was like a huge printout, like 6 feet long, like 3 lines of printout of each floor of the cruise ship, the first cruise ship, whatever it was, the Diamond Princess. And like they're like calling individual like family members and like liaising about this, that, whatever, And I walked in like, 10 days later, and like that's falling off the wall. And now you've got a whiteboard that's like hand scribble, that's like SOP on the top. Number 1, and I'm getting this wrong, but it was something like AMSITs in American waters. Number 2, AMSITs not American waters. Number 3, American waters. Number 4, no AMSITs not American waters. That was the SOP for triaging the 250 cruise ships we now had to track. So this is where it's just like that. These are the extreme examples, right? This is the extreme crisis moment, but the principle still applies of like, you've, where are you trying to play too small and not really tackle the thing? And you've got this bureaucracy built around it. That SOP, quote unquote, which was really just a bunch of chicken scratch on a whiteboard, was enough to do the work. And we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready for the fact that we go from calling individual passengers family members to triaging 250 cruise ships.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's talk about scaling really quickly and throwing out the rule book. That's a great example.
But when you have practices and disciplines and principles around how to be adaptive, you're much more capable of making those pivots. And in the end, the people that thrived and the folks that really carried things forward in a lot of those moments were people who kind of intuitively had a lot of this adaptive leadership in them. And I think the thing that kind of breaks my heart is when you kind of come back around after an experience like that, and there's like a snapback of like, that was really traumatic. Oh, thank God we can like go back to normal. And of course, that hasn't even, that hasn't happened for anyone. I don't think anyone's kind of had that experience of like, oh, thank God COVID's over and now life's back to normal. It's changed for everybody. And that's why I care so much about focusing on the volatility side of it. Because I'm like, nothing's going to get easier. Nothing's going to get easier. But we can learn to get better at navigating it.
Yeah. The last time you and I talked, we had that conversation about COVID and about this conversation of like, when things get back to normal and this realization, like, this is the new norm. Like, this is it. It's not going back. There is no back at this point. And to what you're saying, the growth mindset or being in this constant mindset of like, we have to be adaptive and we have to like change is the constant. The more, if we're going to be married to something, if we're going to embrace something, let's embrace that because that's what's going to serve us in the long run.
Yeah. And, we say it often, like, it's just about having more mature problems 12 months from now, right? Like, people also get their back up when you talk about like evolving the operating system or growing as leaders. Like, well, what's wrong with me now? It's like, yeah, so no, this is not about fixed and broken. This is about, as you said, the growth mindset, the constant evolution. Because if you don't choose to operate from that way, and that's not just a like nice poster on a wall, like we listed it in our values statement, like cute. Now, I want you to show me in your day-to-day how you practice that commitment to growth and adaptation, because it sounds really nice, but it's very uncomfortable a lot of the time. And we have to be really honest with ourselves. We all have aspects of our lives and our work, like I'm the same, that we don't really want to like face what needs to be faced in order to evolve. That's human. So we also have to be honest with ourselves about how easily we are going to regress, slip back, avoid, placate, deny, like all these things. It's human nature. So we got to work with human nature. And that's why then you need practices and discipline and to do it together in order to inoculate yourself against those tendencies, or at least somewhat.
So where's the line between let's call it healthy adaptability, and then just quietly absorbing more and more stuff until you break? And where does recovery fit into all of this?
That's a great question. Well, I would argue that if you're just absorbing until you break, you're actually not adaptive. You're not adaptive because you're not like regenerating, renourishing, restoring, right? And I think there can be maybe another like misconception about embracing volatility is that it looks like some kind of heroism with a cape and like really, yeah. And not that. And there's certainly, I would wonder if you've seen this in the fire space, certainly in emergency response and the humanitarian spaces I've been in, is like chaos junkies. Like there are people that just get off on like emergencies, right? And then they don't know how to like ground and live kind of a live in community, because ultimately crises and volatile situations test our relationships, they test all these things. And so I think that the like people use the word resilience, I guess, but it's like whatever that is, the ability to know that nothing is going to like knock us out or build up for so long that it knocks us out in a way we can't recover from. That is, again, it comes down to what you design into your rhythms and practices, right? And this is when we start to hit the conversation around like self-care and like work-life balance. Yeah, peace out. Yeah. And it's like, and what happens then? Usually we're like, so you individual person, you are entitled / encouraged to do the things that you need to do to care for yourself. Go forth and care. Oh, but hey, can you make sure you get me that like XYZ thing by 5:00? And when you see that, it's like, it's not a systems solution, right? In some ways, the whole like, here, go take time for a yoga class is almost like a bit of a technical solution in its own sense. Like that has not addressed the root cause, which is we still have too much. Our attention is still like too tapped out to take space, and or a mix of that plus I don't feel like I can because my sense of security, control, and approval is threatened by stepping back, because we're in a culture where that's not explicitly valued. It's just rhetoric when they say this. And actually, if I don't show up, I am going to miss XYZ information and then I will be left behind and da 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 da. So it's getting to the bottom of those things. And so that's when people are like, when there's, like wellness programs and all this sort of stuff, I'll be quite frank, a lot of the time it's just window dressing, because nobody actually wants to talk about all the pieces of how we work day in, day out that are being very inefficient with our attention and our energy.
Yeah,
Because that's the more.
I agree 100%. And I think that's probably a lot what you help leaders with too. There is a maturation that occurs as you're learning that adaptability and leading at different levels of saying, there's diminishing returns of how much of myself I put into this versus how much I get out. And if I don't take the time to pay attention to my natural rhythms and my kind of flow, and I'm not making sure that I'm kind of investing in myself, the leader me falls apart. And then that has an exponential impact on the organization and the people that I work with.
Absolutely. And I think where the rub really comes in is you say that, you tell people this reality and they go, yeah, no, I believe it. And then it's like, but like they take the bureaucracy as immutable, as status quo, as untouchable. And I think especially in local government environments where, there, and again, this world far better than I do, but it's this sense of like, well, these are the functions and we run the plays and we make sure we pass the budget and we make sure we like tick these boxes. And then like, that's all the day-to-day stuff. And then like residents are really upset about this thing, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly there's a whole bunch of energy over here. And we just think that that's the only way it can be. So then it's like, okay, how can we like tack on the work of restoring and refresh? It's like, you can't tack it on. You've got to get in there and really learn to work on curating everyone's attention, which means you don't get to just do the thing you want to do or the way you want to do it. You don't get to work on everything. We do have to prioritize. There has to be it's not just a laundry list. And we have to talk about how these different functions work together to provide a full experience of living in this city, not just working in their silos, which again, all four of those things get at or threaten some version of our sense of security, control, or approval. And so there can be loss involved. But for the people that are really committed to the mission and like work to feel satisfying and have a growth mindset, they gravitate towards it. And so you see the sifting of people who are like, don't mind cheese. And you're like, at the end of the day, like, this place doesn't exist primarily to pay you a salary. It exists to deliver these results. And we want to value you, but we have to value you you have to show that you're like willing to evolve in that experience, in the world that we're in. And to be continually asking yourself, what is it about how we're doing this work or how we're performing this function over here that could be better serving this community, better serving this city? If we're just like, yeah, status quo, deliver the thing, like, that's not gonna cut it.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about that from a service standpoint. I think that's part of a leader's job is sometimes it's addition through subtraction. Like, we're busy, but are we adding value? Is what we're doing actually in a meaningful way contributing to the lives of our residents and the business owners and the visitors in our community? And I think you talked about it before. It's like, well, we don't have time to pay attention to that because we just have to keep doing the things. Like, no, we don't. And that's not the way that we should kind of be continuing to go about things. Change the operating system, kind of change the way we're looking at things. I would say for a listener that is joining us, that is maybe leading a team or is working in an environment where everybody is just kind of like, there's this overwhelm or they're stressed out. What's your biggest piece of advice for them that they could take away from this and implement?
I would start by clarifying what is most essential for delivering value to this community. I'm assuming we're talking a city manager kind of situation. Yeah. What is most essential for delivering value to this community in the next 18 months? And there's a book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown that sort of gives the underlying idea. But the idea is like, look, your strategic plan with 6 pillars and 15 metrics under each pillar doesn't tell you what you need to do today. It's a map of the territory. What you need to figure out today through sense-making, scenario planning, understanding the needs of the community, understanding the biggest risks you're facing right now, is really get to that clarity about the one decision that makes 1,000 decisions, as Greg McKeown would say. Because that's when you can start to see how does that then impact each of the different functions that need to come together somehow. What is the reason for needing to cooperate more effectively? This one decision, this one direction, this one decision. So essentially strategy and strategy practice, which is not, in my opinion, the same as strategic planning. Strategic planning is a piece of the puzzle, but strategy is the bigger game.
Lucy, what do you want to leave people with today?
I feel like I've been a bit of hard nosed, but I think I do really want to leave them with the sense that, and this is true for all my clients and why I like working with these clients, is we're doing some of the hardest work. You're doing some of the hardest work out there. And often for a lot less compensation, with a lot more noise and a lot more people that have got a lot more opinions about what you do and a lot more like constraints, bureaucratic constraints that, despite what I said in the last hour, are still very hard to move at times and need to be abided by. And I think that the biggest thing there is to say, like, look, don't give up hope that it needs to feel so hard every day. I think it is hard, but there are ways for it to feel easier and more satisfying when you tend to what I would say the strategy, the systems, and the soul, the leadership side of things. It doesn't have to feel so hard. And I love when leaders can experience and teams can experience that. So, and you deserve it. You deserve for your work to not feel so hard because we need you and you're super important in this society as public servants.
I couldn't agree more. Lucy, thank you for joining us on the Leadership Shift podcast. Where can people go to learn more about your amazing work and the Calyx?
You can go to www.thecalyx.org, and that's the CALYX.org. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn. If you just search Lucy Ellis, the Calyx, you'll probably find me.
I highly recommend it. I am a follower of Lucy on LinkedIn and love the content she puts out there. And I hope, Lucy, that you'll join us again. I love our conversations.
Absolutely. This has been great. Thanks, Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will be back soon.